Hello and welcome to the November MCS Preseen analysis, which of course is on the company ABC Solutions, a software service providing company. So before we start, I'll just tell you a bit about who I am. My name is Peter Steff. I am the head of publications and the head of CIMA production here at Astranti. I have written several mock exams for the company and also marked many case studies. Those of you who have used Astranti before may be aware that I've also written several of the study texts that we publish. So, how is this Preseen analysis going to work? Well, first of all, we're going to go through section by section of the Preseen, picking out the key points, things that they've made clear mention of, things that they haven't perhaps mentioned, which of course could mean that they're not relevant, or it could mean that that is going to be a key thing to come up in the unseen material. I'm also going to go through some of the factors that affect the industry in the real world and how this can perhaps be applied to the Preseen company. We'll also go through some of the key E2 and P2 business models that you will perhaps be expected to use in the actual exam. Likely exam issues based on what has come up in previous exams and based on my knowledge as an exam writer myself of what is easy to write questions on. And finally, little exam hints and tips that could help score you those extra additional marks. After that's finished, we'll go on to the strategic analysis. This will be a full amalgamating video as such that goes through everything and ties it all together nicely. And finally, my top 10 issues, the top 10 things I feel are most likely to come up in the exam. So how is this going to work? Well, first of all, I'm going to assume that you have no knowledge as we go through it. I'm going to assume that this is the first time you have looked at the Preseen and that we'll go through it together. I'm going to ask you to read a section, to make notes on it, and finally we will tie your notes and my notes together by going through it together. And as I've already mentioned, at the very end we'll tie it all on with a full strategic analysis and the top 10 issues. So a few key things to note as we're going through it. This Preseen is the context of the company. It's the background information of the company. And as such, you shouldn't pre-write anything based on this Preseen information. This is the background knowledge that will help you interpret the unseen information you are given in the actual exam. You cannot pass the exam based purely on the knowledge in the Preseen because the examiner will expect you to answer the questions given in the exam. That being said, you must use information given in the Preseen to help you answer the questions in the exam, because it proves that you've read it, it proves you have understanding of the overall context of the industry and the company. So let's move on to the actual Preseen now. Now, first of all, we know it's an IT service provider. So you should already be thinking about companies that are also IT software providers. So this may be companies like Accenture and Capgemini. Companies founded and built around the same time as ABC Solutions to provide similar sorts of services. So let's take a look at the first page then. Now, issue with the first page is sometimes students will look at it and think it's just background information that's not really relevant. They sometimes skip ahead to the financial statements, they skip ahead to the compositions of the board and the company and the products and services the company provides. But there's actually a wealth of information within this introductory page. So let's start. Now, first thing you'll notice is that it explains your role. So you are a financial manager at ABC Solutions. So initially, you should be thinking about the kind of things that a financial manager would be expected to do within a company like this. So you'll be reporting to the financial director, and as such, a lot of your work may be things that are delegated from them. So it may be information about projects, about the current state of affairs within the industry and within the company itself, and other things such as preparing financial statements and preparing budget statements, etc. Next, we are given some information about the founders of the company. So here are the founders: Andrew Gourlay, Bipin Lally, and Colette Sanderson. So now we should be thinking about whether they are still involved within the company. Did they found the company and then go off somewhere else, or are they involved, and in what capacity are they now involved? We also haven't been given any information yet on whether this is a private company or a public company. Now obviously if it was a private company and these directors were still involved, then they will obviously have a lot of power. If it is a public company that trades on the stock market, then their shares, their holdings within the company might be slightly watered down, and also they then have to abide by what the shareholders want. Now the good thing about a public company perhaps is that you can raise extra equity on the stock market, whereas a private company can only raise funding through debt financing. Now obviously the advantage of equity financing is that it is not, you do not have to immediately pay it back like a loan. But of course you risk giving away more control of the business. So keep an eye out for more information later in the pre-scene that could tell us whether it is a private or a public company. Now on to some information about the country in which ABC operates. Now it operates in a country known as Caland, which is an industrialized country in Northern Europe. So given this, we know that there is perhaps a lot of disposable income, a lot of wealthy businesses who perhaps can afford IT services, and also that the level of education within the country is likely to be quite high. And therefore, for a company like this, which will rely on trained staff and decent levels of knowledge within their workforce, are likely to be in a good position, perhaps compared to a company that sets up in a developing nation where labour is likely to be cheaper and there perhaps is likely to be a larger pool of talent, but are they going to be of the necessary quality for an IT service provider? Now next up, it mentions here about currency. It trades in the K dollar, the Caland dollar. Now whenever you see information about currencies, you have to be thinking about potential risks to do with exchange rates. Now we haven't been given any information about the scope of ABC's business at the moment, whether they trade purely in Caland or whether they are an international organisation. And if they are an international organisation, we have to think about the value of the K dollar. If, for example, ABC is trading with a company in Asia or in Northern America where the exchange rate is particularly strong against the Caland dollar, then ABC have to think about how that can impact upon their business. And obviously there are various ways of combating the effects of exchange rates, such as billing in certain currencies. So for example, if they're dealing with the United States, they could bill in US dollars, hold on to that money within the US until the exchange rate changes and then convert it back into K dollars. Or they could insist that companies within other countries trade in K dollars. Therefore, you're mitigating any impact on exchange rates. So as we start building up our models, we can think about the pestle model here. So how does exchange rates fit into our pestle model? Obviously, it's an economical one. So you can see we're only 2 paragraphs into the pre-scene, and yet we've already started to build our key E2 models that will be used to analyze the business and analyze the industry. And then it goes on to talk about the advanced economy. So it's a wealthy economy with a sophisticated infrastructure. Now this is very important for an IT services company, because if there is not good electricity provision, there is not good internet, all these things that are essential for effective computing, that could have an impact on the business. Now, for example, if you are an IT services provider that wants to install a multi-million dollar cloud computing software network to a business that has very poor connections to the internet, they're unlikely to want that because they do not have the infrastructure, the internet, to cope with that. So that also feeds into our pestle analysis here, because that is a technological factor. They need good levels of technology, of good levels of technological infrastructure to succeed, which they do have in Kayland. So now we have some information on how the founders met. Now we can see that Andrew and Bipin worked together in a large IT organization, or they worked for a large organization within the IT department. So we already start to see the pattern here, that we see that they have knowledge in the area, that they have worked within the area before they set up their own company. And also they know Colette, who was a good contact in the recruitment world regarding IT. So she was a primary contact that supplied IT staff. So this is very important, particularly for a business that depends on high quality talent. So they have someone who knows where to find the talent. And they noticed that there was an opportunity here, given the amount of money that companies were spending on external IT. So they worked in their IT department and noticed how much the company that they worked for was spending on bringing external consultants. And this is where the idea came in. And it was also around the time of the Millennium Bug. So I'm sure you will remember the Y2K panic, where everyone thought that computers were going to crash when the clocks turned over for the year 2000. And this, of course, is a very specialist issue that perhaps required a certain degree of knowledge of how computing systems work, but also how specifically this Millennium Bug was going to work. And therefore, even your most advanced computer programmers and coders perhaps were unaware of how to deal with the impact of the Millennium Bug. And so ABC was born. As you can see here, they started the company and recruited a number of consultants, probably using this network of talented IT personnel that Colette was in contact with. And so let's see how they worked. Well, first of all, they employed consultants on a full-time basis, but a lot of them were independent consultants who worked for a daily rate. So now we're going to look at perhaps our stakeholder matrix here. Now, we've learned about full-time employees and part-time freelance employees. So these are stakeholders who are going to have an interest in the business. Now, your full-time employees are likely to perhaps fit into the keep informed section on the Mendelow's matrix. And this is because obviously they have a key interest in what you are doing, because their full-time job, their mortgages, their bills depends on the continued success of the organization. However, they're not going to have too much power as individuals. Of course, this could change if they were to unionize. And then your freelancers would perhaps be more in your little interest section. They have a little bit of interest in what you're doing, but because their jobs do not depend on your organization, they can go elsewhere for business, elsewhere for work. They're not going to be too interested. And as a result, they do not have that much power either. So the three founders decided that they were going to hire high-quality professionals and reward them generously. So this, in a sense, means we're only going to hire the best, but we're going to pay them like they are the best. So this could be a critical success factor to the organization. So by hiring the top quality employees, obviously they're going to be more of an outlay in terms of salaries and bonuses, but there will also be the reward of having the best personnel, of having perhaps better people than competitors and providing a better service. And this again ties to what I was saying about being in an advanced country with an advanced infrastructure, is you are likely to have the talent pool to choose this best from, compared to perhaps a developing nation where there isn't the level of quality amongst the potential employee pool. Now we go on to a section here where ABC developed a good reputation for reliability and meeting deadlines. So this could be another critical success factor here, of hitting deadlines or being reliable, appearing reliable within the eyes of your potential client base. This being particularly important to a company trying to prevent the millennium bug. Obviously, you have a very strict deadline there of the 31st of December 1999, because if you haven't got the job done by then, it's all over, because that is when the millennium bug was going to kick in, if it was going to kick in. And as you can see, there was a lot of competition around at this time, because a large number of IT consultancies were created in response to this. Now, the problem here is that obviously when the millennium bug crisis is over, where are all those companies going to go? They have no need anymore. So they have to adapt to survive, or they will die. Another example here would be during the early 90s with the whole dot-com crisis. Now this was essentially a huge amount of businesses that were founded after the internet started to take off, but ultimately a lot of them failed when the bubble burst, as it was discovered that the internet was perhaps not as viable a platform for business as people thought it was. And probably the biggest example of this is Amazon. Now, when the internet was first founded, there was thousands and thousands of companies that decided to set up as online stores, as it were, to sell anything and everything. And after the bubble burst, the one thing that survived was Amazon, and this was because Amazon diversified the range of products that it provided to a greater extent than anyone else. And now, of course, it's one of the biggest companies in the world. This is because it survived the rough road and came out on top at the end. So, did this happen to ABC? Well, obviously not, because we wouldn't be talking about them now. As it said here, many companies closed because their demand for their core services had dried up. So this signifies that ABC diversified their core services. So we know that a diversified product range is one of the main reasons why the company was able to adapt following the collapse surrounding the millennium bug crisis. And it's also been credited here as one of the main reasons why the business has continued to grow, to the extent that we could probably add diverse product range to our critical success factors. So the key reasons why the business is successful, the things that are necessary for the business to continue being successful. But it also mentions here about strong relationships with clients, strong relationships that are perhaps developed over time, perhaps down to the quality of the work or the regularity of the work, or it could just be an industry standard that in the IT services industry it is important to use a client or to use a service that you trust, because you're often dealing with very sensitive information. So what we can ultimately read from this is that perhaps strong relationships with clients, so strong, secure bonds built up over time, are also critical success factors for the organization. And given the importance of good relationships with clients, and given its necessity to the operations of ABC, we can also bring in another model here. We can bring in Porter's 5 forces, which assesses various different factors and how they impact on the overall competitiveness of the industry, we could perhaps look at placing buyer power as strong. Now the next paragraph here goes on to, in a sense, confirm this, when it talks about success in the field being due to their extensive contacts. Now this goes on to what we were saying earlier about Colette and her extensive range of IT experts, and also returns to what we had mentioned earlier about hiring the best as being a critical success factor. And it's given us an example here about a client who wishes to update a software package that's written in a very specific programming language, but they know that ABC will be able to suggest a programmer with experience working in that language. So in a sense, ABC is almost acting as a middleman in this situation. It could be that ABC have a programmer who's acting as a freelancer who knows this specific language. So ABC will be able to then charge a fee for passing that business opportunity on through themselves to the freelancer. And this also could be seen as a core competence of the business. Now, of course, your core competencies are the things that you do better than anyone else, the things that make clients come back to you every time. This, of course, being different from a threshold resource, which is essentially just something you must do in order to meet the minimum standard required from a company within your industry. Now, on the next section here, it talks about the founders being careful not to focus exclusively on immediate trends. Now, this is important in two ways. First of all, it signifies that the founders are indeed still involved in the business. And it also shows that they are adept at thinking about the future needs of clients, about the future state of play within the industry. And this, of course, is evidenced by the fact that they survived this millennium bug crash that so many competitor companies didn't because of this. So when you're thinking about your strengths and weaknesses of the company, perhaps when you're compiling your SWOT analysis, we can think of the creative and forward-thinking founders as being a strength of the business. And not only are they known to think ahead, they also plan ahead. So this ties in with the old saying of the best way to plan for the future is to create the future. And they've also done this by employing specialists who they know are going to become useful in the future and keeping them on retainer. So they know, or they at least think what they're going to need in the future, and they plan ahead. And this perhaps takes away the ability of competitors to do this by signing the right people in advance, particularly as their expertise might be in quite a unique field, and there may be only a few people capable of fulfilling this need. And also, not only are they planning for the future, but they are also perhaps encouraging the future. If you look at this final sentence here, ABC can also gently introduce the possibility of new products. So if perhaps ABC is working with a client and they see that the client has a certain problem and they know that they are working on a solution which will one day solve this problem, they can start bringing up with the client that we are working on a system that will allow you to combat this. I see you're having problems with this. Well, let me assure you that we are working on this for you, etc. So they're constantly upselling as well. They're acting almost as salesmen rather than just consultants here. And this perhaps goes some way to guarantee future business and also helps build stronger relationships. The client possibly will look at that and think, well, ABC is looking out for my needs. They're looking out for what may impact me in the future and protecting me in advance. And as you can see, this is evidenced here by the fact that they do it in the hope that they will be seen as a preferred contractor in the future. So let's move on to the final paragraph on this opening page then. So it talks about summarizing the position of the company insofar as they look to build long-term relationships with their clients. Now, as we've already gone through several times, this is one of their key factors regarding growth. They know that companies require IT services. They know that they regard IT as a core development of business, particularly in the current day and age where, of course, computers are becoming more and more important, where automation is becoming more and more important and necessary for businesses. It's also worth noting that it mentions here that many companies, particularly companies that rely on computers, they're often reluctant to outsource or contract out their IT services. So this is important as a consultancy to perhaps understand this need of the business, and thus when operating, take care to work to the customer's needs, to work with the customer to provide a service that they will never have to outsource, so that they can keep their IT in-house. You are just purely acting as an advisor, as a consultant, and you are not adapting or changing their systems in a way that they do not wish. And a final sentence here about the importance of developing long-term relationships, which we know is already a critical success factor of ABC. And the value of this is that IT is continuously changing and IT systems will continually need updating. So by forging a close relationship now, you are perhaps guaranteeing repeat business throughout your relationship. So as you can see, as we close this first page, there's actually quite a lot of information here that will provide us with a good grounding to go forward and analyze the rest of the case. So with that in mind, let's go on to the second page now, which is the bios. So we start with Andrew Gurley, and the first thing we notice is that he has experience in the industry. He's a systems analyst by training. Now this is particularly important if he is still involved in the business. For example, if he is still a director or manager within the company and the company is now a public company, he will have to appease certain governance regulations about being qualified for the job. So we know that he is. Then it goes on to say that in the early days of the company, his expertise lay in assessing the changes needed to a client system, identifying the current system they had, and passing this information on to the coders who would then update on his recommendations. This is all contained in this section here. So he was very instrumental in the initial operations of the organization. But what is interesting here is it goes on to talk about how he clearly communicated to customers about what they needed. So this ties back in with what we mentioned earlier on the first page about building good relationships. We can see that he was perhaps a driver of this. This is one of the things that Andrew Gurley established within the organization. And it shows an example of this here, where he's not afraid to tell a client that they need something less expensive than what they are going for. So if, for example, a company hires ABC in and says, I want system X, and system X costs 50 million dollars, but Andrew Gurley looks at it and thinks, actually, you do not need this system. This system will be overkill for you. You would be better off with system Y. It would perhaps service your needs better and be of the level and magnitude of system that you require. Now, of course, this will mean you getting less money. If, say, system Y was only cost 25 million dollars to implement. So essentially, ABC would be losing half of their consultancy fee for implementing that system. But if that company were to install the more expensive one and ABC were to get their larger consultancy fee, and then another company were to come in and say, you've ripped off that organization, that could damage the company's reputation and it would not go towards building good relationships. And it's also, from an ethical standpoint, important, as he is doing something in the client's best interest, which is what ethics is about. It is doing what's best for the client, not what is best for you. And this is very important here because CIMA are very keen on inserting questions about ethics, and they are very keen on examining ethics and examining your attitudes towards ethics. And a good tip here is to always take the moral high ground. If you're looking at a system and it doesn't necessarily look like there's a ethical confliction, but there could be if you really think about it, but it's not big enough to make a big deal, they expect you to take the moral high ground. So for any small ethical issue, take the high road and say, no, this is not acceptable. So just to summarize here, there's a lot of information about him doing what is best for the client, even if this means them installing a larger system than they had initially wanted. If he feels that it is of true value to the organization, he will still do it. Now the next section here goes on to some information about his role within the organization. So we know he now operates as a nominal chief executive. Now, a few things from this phrase here. Now, chief executive, this would imply that it is a public limited company. This being different from a private limited company, which would usually have a managing director. Now, if he's a chief executive, then that means there is a board of directors and then also hopefully a chairman of that board. Now, another important word here is nominally. Now, a chief executive should not necessarily be acting under a nominal pretense. If you are the chief executive, you are the chief executive. That is your job, and you should do that job well. You cannot be a chief executive one day a week and then just go and do lots of other things on the other days. That is your full-time job. Which leads me to question whether he is perhaps suitable for the role of the chief executive, as he shouldn't really be spending as much time going to client meetings and overseeing key projects. Now, this could be an example of micromanagement, which is essentially when you are, in a sense, monitoring staff that you shouldn't be. You should be trusting them to get on with their job and not consistently getting involved with what they are doing to check that they are doing it right. This is an important factor here because it perhaps goes against their critical success factor of hiring key employees or the best employees possible. Why would you hire the best employees possible if you then didn't trust them to do their job properly? And also, micromanagement, particularly in creative industries such as the IT industry, is seen as one of the key things that makes people move on. They don't like to be micromanaged. They like to go about their work how they see fit, without someone constantly looking over their shoulder. So were there to be a question on governance in the exam, these are factors that you could bring up here. That perhaps the CEO is spending too much time on the shop floor, as it were, rather than being the actual CEO. So then it goes on to talk about him being a self-confessed nerd and someone who attends conferences and conventions. So this is good. It perhaps ties in with the fact that he is not acting as a CEO, but it could be that the CEO needs to go to these to learn about developments within the industry. And also good that it shows that he keeps himself informed, keeps himself up to date on changes within the industry, which does sound good. However, it then goes on to talk about how he spends a lot of time in the IT transformation department and has instituted monthly staff meeting. Now this goes back to what I was saying about perhaps he's getting too involved at the lower levels, which leads me to ultimately think that perhaps he isn't right as the chief executive. Perhaps he is doing things out of his own interests, his own desires, what he wants to do, rather than what is best for the company. A company needs a strong, assertive, present CEO, just as a body needs a head. And perhaps this man is not right for the job. And finally, the Preseen talks about his stake, his equity. And when the business was first founded, he had 50% of the equity. So what does he have now? If the company has indeed become a public company, to what extent has his shareholding been watered down? So that's Andrew out of the way. Let's now move on to Bipin. Now Bipin again has experience within the industry. We know that from the first page where him and Andrew worked at the same organization within IT. And the little section here talks about how he is always happiest when he was modifying components to make hardware faster and more resilient. So this goes back to what we were saying about Andrew, where it could be that he is happier actually doing a more lower level job than being a director. Now, as a simple example, you could liken this to a football manager who is happier playing football. They don't act as a manager to the extent that they should do. They're not as effective as a manager as they should be, simply because they're more interested in playing football with the people during training sessions than actually coaching, than actually managing. One of the key things about Bipin, though, is that he is well trusted and well respected within the industry, evidenced here by the fact that many corporations give him access to prototypes ahead of time. Now this works great for the business because perhaps he can then assess these prototypes, look at them, see how ABC could in the future be used as a facilitator of the product, perhaps advising clients of the benefits of these new products that are coming. Say that ABC is going to be an expert in initiating the use of this product within organizations, and in a sense coming back to what we were saying about upselling, about selling future products to clients to help maintain future relationships. However, one bit at the end here does talk about how he loves the opportunity to play with the latest technology. Now this may not necessarily be a bad thing, but it again comes back to this self-interest. When he should be acting as a manager, he should be acting as a director. And this could be either further evidenced or rebutted against in this next section here, where it says he expects to be consulted on all questions relating to the interpretation of emerging standards. Now, this could be that he likes to keep an eye on what's going on. He takes his role seriously and likes to be consulted on any major issues, but it does not necessarily say about the magnitude of levels that which he expects to be questioned on. It just says all questions. Now, obviously, as a senior manager, as a founder, as a director, he should be taking an interest in major things within the business. But if this is small things that could be dealt with at a lower level, just as with Andrew, as we saw earlier, perhaps he is getting too involved with the lower level running of the organization. Now, he is the director of technology, which ties in with his experience. He is trained in technology. He is trained in the engineering of electronics, so he is qualified for this, and he also has a 25% of equity. So this was when it was first established. So this leads us to ask the same questions as it did with Andrews. What is his stake now? If the business has gone public, how much of that has been watered down? So he's also heavily involved in the technology and infrastructure areas. So this, of course, you would expect as the director of technology. And then it goes on to list some specific areas. So it says including storage, data center, cloud, and workspace. So these could be products that the company creates, services that the company provides. And then again, it goes on to mention more things that he gets involved with that he perhaps shouldn't. So it says he attends all meetings, this regardless of what is under discussion, any matter under discussion. So why does he do this? If he's supposed to be the director of technology, why does he attend every single meeting? This is perhaps could be seen as a good thing, but again, will the staff within the technology department feel that they are being micromanaged, that they are being constantly watched by the director for everything they do? And there's again more evidence here of him perhaps being of self-interest when it comes to new technology. He encourages clients to be early adopters. Now, obviously there are risks involved with early adopting in case it fails. Now, early adopting obviously is essentially where you take a piece of technology when it's brand new, before anyone else does. The late majority is the opposite. This is when everyone else comes in with the technology once it has been established, which of course is far less risky. And we can see the evidence of this, and this has led to mixed results, with unproven technology failing to live up with expectations. So this is a risky thing, particularly for a company that prides itself on good customer relations. Now, obviously, if a company has dealt with ABC for a long time, but then at ABC they're constantly trying to push them onto new technology, which has proven to be unsuccessful at times, this could affect the risk of your relationship, and also it could affect how seriously they take ABC's word, which we have already established as being a critical success factor. Now, currently one of the technologies that Bipin is at the forefront of is the bring your own device technology. Now, this is essentially where employees are allowed to bring their own computers into work, their own tablets, smartphones, etc., and access IT systems within the workplace. Now, of course, many companies are not happy about this. What is to stop them from taking all your company information and selling it to a competitor? What's to stop them from spending their whole day on Facebook or on YouTube, not doing their own work? Whereas, of course, if you use a work PC, you can limit what is accessible. But of course, the advantage of this is it adds another aspect of flexibility to the workplace. That employees can just bring in their own stuff, do some work and go home again, or they can access from home, so you can improve flexibility, particularly for people with families, if they can work at home, and as a result may allow you to retain talent that otherwise might have to be let go, or talent that might leave due to finding more flexible pastures elsewhere. And so, of course, for a system like this to work, it would need some sort of software security. which of course is a service that ABC could provide. And so it seems logical that Bipin would be pushing this, particularly if there was some sort of system that ABC provided, as it would then be a sale opportunity. Bipin could go to a client and talk about the benefits involved with bring your own device, and then when everyone says, oh, but we don't want to do this, people could steal our data, they say, well, actually, ABC provide a security system that allows people to access the information without being able to take anything from it. So let's move on to the final founder now. So this is Colette Sanderson. Now, Colette doesn't necessarily have any experience in IT in terms of actually doing IT, but she has been a recruitment consultant for many years. And she has a very large range of specialist contacts, which of course was essential to the business in the initial stages when they needed a lot of freelance workers working on a daily wage. Now, Bipin and Andrew knew about her, and this is why they picked her and why they thought she would be an ideal partner. Because one of their critical success factors, as we mentioned in the first page, was about recruiting and retaining the right staff. And as it goes on to say, she has a database of more than 2,000 IT professionals, many of whom are available for consultancy contracts and have worked with ABC on one of these consultancy contracts in the past. So she's very useful at facilitating business throughout the organization by bringing in the right people for specialist jobs. So she's very important. And as you would suspect, as a key recruitment personnel, she attends all the right meetings. She goes to network a lot, meets potential clients, goes to IT conferences and speaks to recruits during the breaks. She does everything that you would want an experienced recruiter to do. This is particularly useful within the IT industry, where a lot of people will want to be more freelance and to work on shorter and medium-term contracts. This could be due to having families, this could be due to having other commitments, or purely by the nature of the kind of person who works within this industry. A very creative individual perhaps would not want to be tied to a full-time job. So it works out perfectly with the industry in which she operates. And we can see evidence of this here, where lots of individuals enjoy the opportunity to earn money on part-time and short-term contracts. In fact, IT services is has one of the youngest freelancer rates, as in a lot of people go freelance early in their careers rather than later in their careers. So lots of opportunity to go freelancer at a very young age, and as such, that means a lot of individuals are available on these freelancer contracts. But her expertise is not limited just to freelancers. She works with other IT companies. In case anyone wants to perhaps go on a joint venture with ABC, for example, if there is a project that is too much for one company to take on, they can work together, share the right information to help provide a more efficient service to the client and to split the winnings. Now, obviously, this is not as lucrative, as it's said here, than winning the contract yourself, but it is still billable time. So it's better perhaps to have business and split the business than to have no business, to only want business that you can get all for yourself and end up having no business. So this is very important, to have contacts within the industry. Working together ensures more of a mutual survival of different companies, if companies can work together. And in addition to recruiting the right people or securing the right people to perform contract, she also comes into contact with senior managers who would be able to use the services. It's all right perhaps appealing to a lower level employee about the benefits of ABC as a potential opportunity for employment, but of course a consultancy firm is all about being employed themselves by organizations. So she's able to converse with people who would be in a position to bring on ABC as external consultants. And this goes into her title here as Director of Consulting, and based on what we've seen so far, there's nothing that we could argue means she isn't the right person for that job. Although she has become heavily involved in human resources, which A, is not her job, but also it does, however, tie in with the kind of things that she does with her training, with her background. However, the more significant issue here is that there is no specific HR function. Now, this is very important for a company that says retaining talent is one of its key objectives. Now, HR is very important, and this does not just come to dealing with complaints or ensuring that everyone's happy in the workplace. It also brings in a lot of other key theories and functions which should be being implemented which aren't. Now, this is such as training. There doesn't seem to be any mention of training within the Preseen so far. Obviously, they expect the people to be able to use the systems that they're on, but there's no mention of specific training within the workplace. Human resources also extends to motivation. So are employees being kept motivated? Is there opportunities for advancement? Are they happy where they are? And this is important because particularly in an industry such as this, where you are working with perhaps creative individuals or individuals with a lot of talent who could find work quite easily elsewhere, you have to keep them motivated. You have to give them a reason to want to stay. And also, without a specific and formal HR function, there perhaps won't be a specific and formal recruitment function. Now, obviously, Colette has all this experience in the industry and has this database, but in terms of full-time employees, you must be sure of getting the right people, particularly as it is a critical success factor of the company. And so another key reason for a HR function is to have a solid, formal recruitment process to ensure you get the right people. And finally, the exact same question that has come up in both Andrew's and Bipin's: what is her stake now? Initially, she owned 25% of the equity when ABC was first established. So what is it now, given that the company may have gone public, given that the company has grown? So that brings us to the end of our first video in this MCS Preseen analysis. I hope you have enjoyed the video and I hope you have learned from the video. If you wish to know more about the Preseen video series and all the other products which we have on offer at Astranti, please visit www.astranti.com. Thank you.